Good morning. I hereby call to order this 14th meeting of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission for the year 2018 and ask that you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As a reminder, on the inside of your agenda are instructions in terms of if we have an emergency where you need to evacuate the building, and also information where you can go to the restroom for your convenience. The first matter on this morning's agenda are the approval of the minutes for August 23rd, 2018, and I will call upon Commissioner Sweet, who is the editor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have reviewed the minutes of the public meeting of August 23rd, 2018, and move that they may be approved as submitted.
You have heard the motion of Commissioner Sweet for the approval of the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Kennard. Any discussion, any further edits? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Moving on to our agenda, we will call up Secretary of the PUC, Secretary Chiavetta, who will lead us through this morning's agenda.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Your various bureaus and offices offer the following agenda for your consideration. Therefore, let us begin on page 1 of the regular agenda. It is recommended by Director Monahan and the Bureau of Audits that the Commission make the MEI report and the implementation plan of the First Energy companies public.
Is there a motion to call up the matter for consideration?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Coleman, second by Commissioner Kennard. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a motion on the matter.
Vice Chairman Place.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I ask that my motion be placed in the record as if I'd read it in its entirety. Before the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission is the management efficiency investigation of Metropolitan Edison Company, the Pennsylvania Electric Company, the Pennsylvania Power Company, and West Penn Power Company, jointly FEPA companies. September 17, 2018 implementation plan. The MEI documents the company's progress implementing the 26 accepted and 1 partially accepted original recommendations from the February 2015 Focus Management and Operations Audit. Audit staff reviewed and found that the companies have effectively or substantively implemented 13 of the prior recommendations and taken action on some action on the remaining recommendations. Additionally, Bureau staff has made 14 follow-up recommendations for improvement. In reviewing the matter before us, including the February 2015 Focus Management and Operations Audit, it is apparent that the implementation of the recommendations is continuing and not fully implemented as of this date. Due to the continuing implementation of these recommendations, I recommend that the reporting requirements listed in Appendix A of the Commission's order entered March 30th, 2015 be extended an additional 3 years or until October 1, 2021. In addition, I concur that the MEI report and the company's implementation plan be made public. Therefore, I move that 1, Metropolitan Edison Company, the Pennsylvania Electric Company, Pennsylvania Power Company, and West Penn Power Company are directed to continue to provide the additional reports listed in Appendix A of the Commission's order entered March 30th, 2015 for additional 3 years or until October 1, 2021. 2, Metropolitan Edison Company, the Pennsylvania Electric Company, Pennsylvania Power Company, and the West Penn Power Company are directed to file the reports with the appropriate bureaus listed in Appendix A of the Commission's order under this docket for an additional 3 years or until October 1, 2021. 3, this docket is to remain open for the filing of the reports described herein. 4, the Commission's secretarial letter directing the First Energy Pennsylvania companies to proceed with their September 17, 2018 implementation plan include the extension of the reporting requirements described herein. Thank you.
You have heard the motion of Vice Chairman Place. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Sweet. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0. On the matter as amended, if there's no objection, we'll go with the previous roll call. Seeing no objection, the matter as amended passes 5-0.
Turning to page 2, in matters presented by Director Sophie and the Office of Special Assistance, it is recommended in an omnibus motion that the commission adopt both items on page 2.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Sweet. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 3, it is recommended that the commission adopt the proposed opinion and order in the formal complaint of Core Communications versus Verizon, Pennsylvania.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion?
Madam Chair, I have a conflict statement.
Commissioner Sweet.
Thank you. Before joining my staff as legal counsel, Susan Koa was working in the Office of Administrative Law Judge and worked on this case in her capacity as an administrative law judge. Please note that she has not advised me in this matter.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
I also have a statement on the matter.
Vice Chairman Place.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I ask that my statement be entered into the record as if I had read it in its entirety. Before us for disposition are the exceptions of Core Communications Incorporated to the initial decision of Administrative Law Judge Susan D. Caldwell, as well as the reply exception submitted by Verizon, Pennsylvania. This is a rather controversial proceeding involving complex legal and technical issues of intercarrier compensation and wholesale interconnection between Core, a competitive local exchange carrier, and Verizon, Pennsylvania, an incumbent local exchange carrier. My statement is limited to the issue of compensation that is due to Core for the use of tandem trunk ports that are dedicated for Verizon PA's use. The compensation relating to the trunk ports constitutes the bulk of the amount in dispute in this proceeding. However, although I believe that Core is entitled to compensation for the use of its tandem trunk ports by Verizon, the total amount is governed by the Commission's ruling that established and provided applicable unbundled network element rates for such ports, appropriate billing parameters, and applicable interest. I'm not persuaded by Verizon PA's arguments that Core's charges for the use of its tandem trunk ports is subsumed within the overall traffic-sensitive permitted of use intercarrier compensation rate that Verizon PA pays Core for the termination of Verizon's traffic at Core's network facilities. As Core's testimony indicated, the tandem trunk ports at issue are not traffic-sensitive. Thus, the corresponding and appropriate compensation for these ports involves the recovery of non-traffic-sensitive costs. The evidentiary record indicates that Verizon did not provide sufficient and convincing explanations for such non-traffic-sensitive tandem trunk port costs, and rates are included and subsumed in the traffic-sensitive intercarrier compensation that Verizon pays Core. I believe that Core was able to show that Verizon's approach was flawed and its demonstrative, quote, rate table and diagram, unquote, were not consistent with Verizon PA's 2001 TELRIC cost study. Furthermore, I'm not persuaded by Verizon PA's arguments that Core cannot impose charges for the use of the tandem trunk ports because Verizon itself does not impose the same charges on Core for handling of local traffic. Verizon acknowledges that it imposes such charges for the termination of inter-exchange traffic. In my opinion, the argument that Core cannot charge a tandem trunk port rate for the termination of Verizon traffic because such a rate, quote, does not appear in a Core tariff and is not Core's otherwise generally available rate, end quote, is equally unconvincing. First, acceptance of this argument can mean that Core provides and will have to provide network functionalities and elements, such as the tandem trunk ports that are dedicated for the termination of Verizon PA traffic, without recovering its corresponding non-traffic sensitive costs. Second, as Core explains, the applicable interconnection agreement permits Core to, quote, simply bill Verizon at any generally available rate not to exceed Verizon's, end quote. The applicable Verizon PA uni rate for tandem trunk ports is such a generally available rate. I do not agree with Core's use, however, of the $214.57 per month rate level that is applied for the billing of the tandem port charges to Verizon. Verizon PA is correct in its argument that the applicable rate is $71.48 because it was effectively modified by the Commission in 2004 at the conclusion of its generic proceeding involving Verizon PA's uni rates. There is no question that this uni rate modification applies to the applicable interconnection agreement between Core and Verizon PA. Furthermore, the correct application of the $71.48 monthly rate would require an actual and appropriate billing parameters and a corresponding and substantial downward adjustment of Core's monetary claim in this proceeding. Because I believe that Core was entitled to appropriate compensation for the use of its tandem trunk ports, I respectfully dissent in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Place. I also have a comment to be placed on the record. I asked it to be placed on the record in its entirety. So for me, this matter presents 4 issues in this interconnection agreement dispute. The first issue is whether Core should be denied all compensation for services provided by Core because Core's schedule in the ICA contained no rates. Core should not be denied any compensation because the ICA contained mirroring language which supports allowing parties to rely on Verizon's rates as a ceiling to the rates to be paid for services rendered. That language distinguishes this ICA from ICA disputes in other jurisdictions. I prefer to err on the side of requiring compensation because the Commission generally prefers competitive practices that require payment for services. Second is the compensation Core claims for port trunking service provided to Verizon, an unbundled network element or part of the federally mandated charge of 0007 per minute of use for dial-up internet service, internet traffic. In my view, port trunking charges constitute a separate service. Verizon itself maintains port trunking charges for non-local traffic. Other carriers do the same, and we have approved them. Third, should the rate Core seeks for uni-port trunking be the rate in place before the Commission established a lower uni rate? I believe that Core's compensation should be limited to the lowest rate. And finally, can Core charge for multiplexing service provided to Verizon? I consider multiplexing service to be a service that is distinct from the dial-up FCC rate or port charges, and therefore I respectfully dissent. Any further discussion?
Chairman, I do have a verbal statement on this matter.
Commissioner Coleman.
Thank you. This is yet another inter-carrier compensation dispute between Core and Verizon. And during the 8.5 years that I've been on this bench, there seems to be a regular occurrence here between these two parties, which is unfortunate and regrettable. So here we are again this morning trying to referee the language of this agreement. And I have to say that I agree this morning with our OSA recommendation to affirm the initial decision that Core has not met its burden of proof to be compensated for these charges. Core is seeking payment from Verizon PA for facilities that the credible record evidence shows Verizon provisioned to itself and did not order from Core. I also agree with our staff that the facility charges in dispute are not authorized by the applicable interconnection agreement between the parties or the tariff. Rather, what Core is entitled to receive from Verizon PA under their agreement is reciprocal compensation for termination of internet traffic. Moreover, the timing of Core's billing is curious. As the record shows, the Core waited 12 years to bill Verizon PA for these facility charges. For these reasons, I agree with the recommendation of not one but 2 of our bureaus to dismiss Core's complaint in its entirety. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Opposed?
And I also will be voting in the negative. So the matter passes 3-2, noting the dissent of Vice Chairman Place and myself.
Continuing on page 3, it is recommended that the Commission adopt an omnibus motion, beginning with the remaining item on page 3, the complaint of Nancy Colbert versus Pico Energy, and the first 2 items on page 4, ending with the petition of Safe Travel Limousine.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
It is recommended that the commission adopt the proposed opinion and order in the complaint of Mosette Mason versus the Philadelphia Gas Works.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a statement on the matter.
Vice Chairman Place.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I ask that my statement be placed into the record as if I had read it in its entirety. I seem to be repetitive this morning. Before the Commission for consideration of the exceptions to the initial decision of Administrative Law Judge Gould in the complaint of Mosette Mason regarding Philadelphia Gas Works in the above captioned proceeding. Ms. Mason filed a formal complaint with the Commission alleging an inability to pay her gas bill along with a reliability, safety, and quality problem with her natural gas service. Ms. Mason specifically stated that PGW had shut off her utility service, and as relief, she is seeking a payment arrangement. In the ID, ALJ Gould dismissed the complaint on the basis that the complainant failed to meet the burden of proof that she qualifies for a commission-issued payment arrangement. Ms. Mason filed exceptions, and PGW filed replies to those exceptions, which are before us today. In the ID, the ALJ noted that the complainant had defaulted on one company-issued payment arrangement, had not made any payments on her account since September 2013, and therefore denied the request for a commission payment arrangement based on the complainant's lack of good faith payment history. In Ms. Mason's exception, she stated that the ALJ erred in finding that the last payment made by her was in 2013. The complainant indicated, and PGW's hearing Exhibit 2 confirmed, that 6 additional payments were made to Ms. Mason's account between 2013 and 2016. The complainant indicates that the exclusion of these payments resulted in a decision to deny the request for a payment arrangement. Ms. Mason averred that when these additional payments are properly considered, she now meets the burden of proof for a payment arrangement. In PGW's reply exceptions, the company indicates that the payments made to Ms. Mason's account after 2013 were low-income heating energy assistance program grant payments credited to her bill and, quote, not payments made by her in an effort to pay down her utility bill, unquote. The ALJ agreed with this reasoning and explained that, since these payments were not made by the complainant, they do not count as payments when establishing a record of good faith effort to pay the utility bills. In the instance of LIHEAP funds, recipients have to actively seek and apply for the grants in order to receive the funds. This includes significant effort on the part of the complainant to apply for, produce documents in support of, and indicate to which utility company these grant payments should be applied. Receipt of a LIHEAP grant is not a process which occurs automatically, nor is it guaranteed. Ms. Mason sought out these grants in an effort to pay down her utility bill, and as such, these payments of more than $800 in 2 years should be taken into account and consideration when evaluating her good faith efforts. I believe that seeking out additional funding sources in lieu of being able to make payments oneself represents a good faith effort to pay one's bill. Pursuant to Chapter 14, Commission can only grant a payment arrangement of up to 5 years. The record shows that a 5-year payment arrangement will be challenging for this complainant, but not necessarily impossible. As such, I believe we should have extended our discretion to grant a payment arrangement in this case. Perhaps more fundamentally, I also strongly encourage Philadelphia Gas Works to consider re-enrolling Ms. Mason in the Customer Assistance Program and any other assistance programs for which she may qualify, as this would provide relief to a level of energy burden that someone of Ms. Mason's economic limitations could sustain. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Place. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
The motion passes 4-1, noting the dissent of Vice Chairman Place.
Turning to page 5. It is recommended in an omnibus motion the Commission adopt both items on page 5, beginning with the complaint against Dodds Associates, and turning to page 6, noting at the top of page 6 that the complaint regarding Rosemont Taxi has been withdrawn by the Bureau, continuing with the omnibus to include the remaining item on page 6 and both items on page 7, ending with the joint petition of Verizon, Pennsylvania.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Vice Chairman Place, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 8 and matters presented by Director Diskin and the Bureau of Technical Utility Services, it is recommended in an omnibus motion that the Commission adopt all of the items on page 8, beginning with the letter of notification filed by Mid-Atlantic Interstate Transmission, and including both items on page 9, ending with the application of TransBeam.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Sweet, second by Commissioner Kennard. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 10, it is recommended by Chief Counsel Panque and the Law Bureau that the Commission adopt a single item on page 10, the petition of CenturyLink.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 11, in matters presented by Chief ALJ Rainey in the Office of Administrative Law Judge, it is recommended that the Commission adopt ALJ Pell's initial decision in the complaint of Nidza Negron versus the Philadelphia Gas Works.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Vice Chairman Place, second by Commissioner Kennard. Any discussion?
I have a statement on the matter.
Vice Chairman Place.
Madam Secretary, I ask that my statement be placed into the record as if I had read it in its entirety. Before the Commission for consideration is the initial decision of Administrative Law Judge Pell in the complaint of Nidza Negron regarding Philadelphia Gas Works in the above captioned proceeding. The ID denied the complaint wherein Ms. Negron seeks the Commission payment arrangement for her non-cap arrearage. ALJ Pell indicated that, quote, based on the complainant's poor payment history as well as the complainant's failure to keep the terms of 3 separate company-issued payment arrangements, it is unlikely that she would be able to keep the terms of the 3-year payment arrangement where she would be required to pay $396.81 per month in addition to her regular monthly payments, end quote. Inability to pay or likeliness to default are not standards set out in either statute or regulation that guide how the Commission rules on payment arrangements. The Commission cannot prejudge whether a complainant will stay current with a payment arrangement, nor should this be a deciding factor in whether or not to award one. However, I do agree with the final disposition of the case and agree with ALJ Pell that Ms. Negron has not established a good faith effort, which is the current guidance on deciding whether a commission-based payment arrangement is warranted in a case where termination has occurred. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye and concurrent only, result only.
The motion passes 5-0, noting that Vice Chairman Place concurs in result only.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt ALJ Brady's initial decision in the complaint of Lydia Jackson versus the Philadelphia Gas Works.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a statement on the matter.
Vice Chairman Place.
Once more into the breach. Madam Secretary, I ask that my statement be placed in the record as if I'd read it in its entirety. Before the Commission for consideration is the initial decision of Administrative Law Judge Brady in the complaint of Lydia Jackson regarding Philadelphia Gas Works in the above captioned proceeding. The ID denied the complaint wherein Ms. Jackson sought a commission-based payment arrangement for her non-cap arrearage. Under the statutory authority of Chapter 14, the Commission has broad authority to issue commission-based payment arrangements. ALJ Brady indicated that, quote, the Commission may decline to issue a payment arrangement if the complainant exhibits a poor payment history, inability to pay, and/or likeliness to default, end quote. ALJ Brady indicated that Ms. Jackson made only 3 payments from February 2015 through April 2018, and he considers this to be a poor payment history. I disagree with the ALJ's reasoning in this case in regard to both of these matters. 3 separate payments of $849.23, $58.26, and $200, when considering Ms. Jackson's income of $1,526 per month for a household of 4, only 76% of the federal poverty income guidelines, is significant. And arguing that only 3 payments were made ignores that the $849 payment is a significant amount and well exceeds even the bounds of a very high monthly payment. That large amount should be taken into consideration and weighted accordingly. Over this 3-year period, Ms. Jackson paid over $1,100 to PGW, which averages to around $30 monthly, which can reasonably be considered a good faith effort to pay considering her limited income. Additionally, the last payment on her account was paid by Ms. Jackson months after her service was terminated, further indicating a good faith effort to pay on an account that was already in termination status so that she could seek reinstatement of her service. Chapter 14 of the Public Utility Code permits a maximum payments arrangements of 5 years. This 5-year payback period would result in a $269 per month repayment schedule in addition to the amount of her monthly bill. However, in considering Ms. Jackson's current monthly income of $1,526, ALJ Brady further states that Ms. Jackson would be unable to pay this amount and uses this as part of the reasoning for why her request for a payment arrangement should be denied. In terms of the inability to pay or likeliness to default, those are not standards, again, outlined either in statute or regulation that guide how the Commission decides payment arrangement requests. The Commission cannot prejudge, as I noted earlier, whether a complaint will stay current with a payment arrangement, nor should this be a deciding factor in whether or not to award one. Ms. Jackson has 3 children under the age of 18 living with her for whom she is financially responsible and has already endured 1 winter without essential service. Clearly, the family is payment troubled and struggling financially. Ms. Jackson has not had a commission-based payment arrangement previously, and therefore she is seeking a first commission-ordered payment arrangement to enable her to resume critical service prior to the upcoming winter months. A payment arrangement does not discharge any of her debt or reduce the amount she owes to the utility. It merely provides her with an extended length of time to pay back this debt. For the above reasons, I feel strongly that the Commission should have exercised its authority to issue a payment arrangement in this case. In addition, I would also strongly encourage Philadelphia Gas Works to consider re-enrolling Ms. Jackson into the Consumer Assistance Program and any other assistance program for which she qualifies. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Place. Any further discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair, if I could
Commissioner Sweet.
make a very brief extemporaneous remark on this matter, on these matters. Really, we have what I've been referring to with my staff as a PGW trilogy this meeting of 3 very difficult cases. These kinds of consumer cases dealing with the very poorest of the poor are often difficult and always excruciating and really gut-wrenching. I have, on several occasions, bemoaned the fact that this commission has very little practical ability to remedy these cases. And sadly, it's not just the people we have before us today in their cases, but there are thousands of low-income individuals throughout Pennsylvania who end up with huge arrearages. And I would point out that at least 2 of the litigants today, one has a $7,000 arrearage and one has a $17,000 arrearage. And these are just, in many instances, almost hopeless economic challenges. Very, very difficult and very troubling to me, and I know to the other 4 members of the commission. Beyond that, I would just refer anyone who is interested in our thoughts on the matter, that the chair and I had a previous joint statement on December 7th of 2017 on this subject. And we'll provide, actually, I have a written copy I can provide to you for addition in today's record. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Sweet. Any further discussion?
Chairman, I do have a statement as well.
Commissioner Coleman.
First, I'd like to associate myself with the very eloquent statement from my colleague, Commissioner Sweet. These are cases that come before us from time to time that really do cause pause. And as Commissioner Sweet has indicated, that these get to be the worst of the worst. These are the most economically challenged customers that we're talking about today. And in this case, there are 3 PGW customers that their service has been terminated for non-payment. There are a number of low-income customers across the state of Pennsylvania that each and every day try to manage their own personal finance and figure how they're going to pay one bill over another. And I guess the good news in that regard is that a strong 80% of low-income customers in Pennsylvania do pay their utility bills and are not coming before this commission, as these 3 cases are this morning. I appreciate the passion of the vice chairman, but the reality of these cases, I think you got to put some context around some of the payment history. As the vice chairman indicated, in one case, the customer had made payments, but they had made payments using a LIHEAP grant. And one can argue that, is the customer really putting any of their own money into payment? In the other case, that the vice chairman had stated that there were 3 payments made over a period of 3 years. Now, I would argue that these 3 cases amount to more than $40,000. $40,000 among 3 cases to PGW, and I think that's significant. I don't believe that PGW is the villain here. I think this is circumstances that we have to deal with from time to time that are very, very difficult and really pull at emotion. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that there are only so many dollars that can be used to be paying for those that can't afford their bill. And each time we start creating payment arrangements for people who cannot afford payment arrangements and increase these arrearages, the people who are paying their bills, those low-income customers are the one that I'm most concerned about, that are living paycheck to paycheck. And now we're going to require them to have to pay more into a program to pay for those that cannot. And I think that just continues to exacerbate this issue. So these are, again, very emotionally charged cases that come before us and very tough decisions to make. But based upon the facts in these cases, and I believe that those are the facts that we need to be using that guide us to make decisions here this morning, I don't believe that the complainants have shown the prerequisite good payment history to receive a commission payment arrangement. And therefore, I agree with the initial decision in dismissing this complaint. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Any further discussion?
Madam Chairman, I would like to speak on the item as well. While it's true that there's no statutory or regulations concerning this topic, the Commission does have a very long history of case law struggling with these very issues that you see us struggling with here today. In Crawford and Hewitt, has been our case law for a very, very long time. And the basic rule, as I understand it, is first, was there entering into a payment arrangement, is whether or not there was good faith exhibited by the customer. Here, as noted by Commissioner Coleman, there is $40,000 worth of arrearage. Every one of these 3 cases involve broken payment arrangements, sometimes broken multiple payment arrangements. Our case law first looks to whether or not there's good faith. I don't think it exists in this case. The second item these cases ask us to look at is, even if there was good faith, could the customers afford to make up the arrearage? I think we can go there now. I think we can conclude that this one customer cannot pay $17,000 over 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. It's not the test of the case. It is a additional aspect of it once you get past the good faith. And I think that's a fair case analysis. I think the case is a struggle by the Commission over years to come up with a fair rule. I think we have fair rules, and I think we're following those rules today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennard. And if there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
The motion passes 4-1, noting the dissent of Vice Chairman Place.
It is recommended in an omnibus motion that the commission adopt the 2 remaining ALJ decisions on page 11.
Is there a motion to adopt the staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Madam Chairman, that concludes the regular agenda. We turn now to the carry-in agenda. There is one case of special interest presented by the Office of Special Assistance, recommending that the commission conduct a binding poll of the issues to address exceptions and replies filed by the parties in response to the ALJ's recommended decision in the rate case of UGI Utilities Electric Division. Let us begin with issue number 1 of the polling sheets. Rate base, original cost utility plant in service, end of year versus average rate base methodology.
Is there any discussion before we poll on this first issue? Seeing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I also will go with the ALJ.
Issue number 2A, rate base, original cost utility plant in service, electric engineering and operations center.
Is there any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 2B, rate base, original cost utility plant in service, electric engineering and operations center.
Any discussion before we poll on this one? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
UGI.
Commissioner Sweet.
UGI.
Commissioner Kennard.
Also UGI.
Vice Chairman Place.
UGI.
And I will also go with UGI.
Issue number 3, rate base, additions to rate base, cash working capital and meter read lag.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 4, expenses, vegetation management.
Any discussion before we poll on this matter? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 5, expenses, company-owned services transition program.
Any discussion before we poll on this matter? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
I will also go ALJ.
Issue number 6, expenses, environmental remediation.
Any discussion before we poll on this matter, on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
OCA.
Commissioner Sweet.
OCA.
Commissioner Kennard.
OCA.
Vice Chairman Place.
OCA.
I also will go with OCA.
Issue number 7, expenses, storm damage.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 8, expenses, rate case.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
UGI.
Commissioner Sweet.
UGI.
Commissioner Kennard.
UGI.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ, as indicated in the statement I will read at the termination of the process.
And I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 9, expenses, employees, salaries and wages, net of employee additions.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 10, expenses, employees, employee additions.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
Also ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 11, expenses, employees, outside services employed.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 12, expenses, employees, employee activity costs.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 13, expenses, employees, allocated stock options, and restricted stock options.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
UGI.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
UGI.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ is again as indicated in my terminal statement.
And I will be going with UGI.
Issue number 14, expenses, depreciation.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place,
ALJ.
and I will be going with ALJ.
Issue number 15, expenses, power supply.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place,
ALJ.
and I will be going with ALJ.
Issue number 16, expenses, electrical engineering and operations center.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place,
ALJ.
and I will be going with ALJ.
Issue number 17, fair rate of return, cost of common equity, overview, risk premium, and comparable earnings.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place,
ALJ.
and I will be going with ALJ.
Issue number 18, fair rate of return, cost of common equity, DCF analysis, growth rate.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place,
I&E is clarified by my statement.
and I will be going with ALJ.
Issue number 19, fair rate of return, cost of common equity, DCF analysis, leverage adjustment.
Is there any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
I will also go with ALJ.
Issue number 20, fair rate of return, cost of common equity, capital asset pricing model.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place,
I&E is indicated in my statement.
and I will be going with ALJ.
Issue number 21, fair rate of return, cost of common equity, additional risk considerations.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman,
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet,
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard,
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place,
ALJ.
and I will be going with ALJ.
Issue number 22, fair rate of return, cost of common equity, management effectiveness adjustment.
Any discussion before we poll on this issue?
Madam Chairman, I do have a motion on this matter.
Commissioner Coleman.
Thank you. I'd ask that my motion be entered into the record as though I read it in its entirety. The recommended decision included a 20 basis point adjustment to the cost of common equity based upon management effectiveness, which is permitted under the Public Utility Code and has been utilized by the Commission in the past. The record evidence shows that UGI exceeded its 2016 CADI, SAFE, and SAIDI benchmark levels of reliability at 26%, 24.1%, and 44.3% respectively. Additionally, UGI has implemented a fully voluntary energy efficiency and conservation plan, which they should be commended for. In consideration of the record evidence and arguments before us, along with the exceptions and reply exceptions of the parties, I believe that a management effectiveness adjustment is warranted, but that a 5 basis point adjustment better serves the public interest. Therefore, I move that regarding number 22 of the polling sheets, fair rate of return, cost of common equity, management effectiveness adjustment, UGI Utilities, Inc., Electric Division be awarded a management effectiveness adjustment of 5 basis points, and that the Office of Special Assistance include this directive in the opinion in order to be prepared at this docket. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. We'll go into the polling. You've heard the motion of Commissioner Coleman. Commissioner Sweet.
Aye. Yes.
Of Commissioner Coleman's?
Motion.
Okay. Commissioner Kennard.
I'm going to be voting no on the motion. My vote is to agree with the ALJ that there should be a 20 basis point management effectiveness reward to UGI. For all the reasons stated by Commissioner Coleman, it's an exemplary company. It has done very well. It's Katie, Safety, and Sadie are the first, second, and third highest among the gas companies. So not only the number are they beating their benchmarks, they're beating their peers as well. 20 basis points would be 0.1% of the company's total operating revenues. And I believe that a 5 basis point reward is not sufficient for the exemplary management of this company. Therefore, I'll be voting no.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Place.
So I'm opposed to the motion. I would support I and E as clarified in my statement.
And I am supporting the Coleman motion.
Issue number 23, taxes, 2018 TCJA adjustment, retroactive and single issue rate making.
Is there any discussion before we poll on the issue?
I have a motion, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Sweet.
Thank you. Before the Commission for consideration are exceptions and replies to the recommended decision of administrative law judges. I would like to commend the ALJs for a well-written and well-reasoned decision that addressed incredibly complex rate case issues. Included in UGI's request are proposed rates that have been amended to reflect the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, herein Tax Act, reduction in the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. Earlier this year, this commission assessed the impact of the Tax Act and determined that the decrease in the corporate tax rate caused existing utility rates to no longer be just and reasonable. We concluded that the tax savings should be flowed back to consumers on a current basis and directed certain utilities, not including UGI, to implement a negative surcharge to recognize the Tax Act changes. Those utilities also were required to establish deferred regulatory liability accounts to record the tax savings associated with the Tax Act for the period January 1, 2018 through June 30, 2018. We directed that those accounts accrue interest at the residential mortgage lending rate specified by the Secretary of Banking in accordance with the Loan Interest and Protection Law. For those utilities like UGI that had pending rate cases, we expressed an expectation that parties in those proceedings would address the effect of the tax rate reductions on the justness and reasonableness of the consumer rates charged during the period of the suspension period, during the term, of the suspension period. In particular, we expressed an expectation that the parties would address whether a retroactive surcharge or other measure was necessary to account for the tax rate changes that became effective January 1 of this year. In the proceeding before us today, I recognize that UGI reflected in its rates going forward the effect of the Tax Act. However, I agree with the Commission's Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement and the ALJs that UGI should be required to implement a negative surcharge to return to customers the net tax savings associated with the reduction in federal income tax rate for the period January 1, 2018 through the effective date of UGI's new rates. Included in INE's testimony on this issue was the recommendation that return of that money also include interest at the residential mortgage lending rate. In my review of the ALJ's recommended decision in this proceeding, it appears that the ALJs adopted INE's recommendation that UGI be required to implement a negative surcharge, but failed to address the inclusion of interest I find it appropriate to include interest on the roughly $212,000 net tax savings for the period January 1 through the effective date of UGI's rates. This is consistent with our treatment of the deferred regulatory liability accounts to be established by those utilities without pending rate cases. Therefore, I move that number one, UGI refund its ratepayers the net tax savings from January 1, 2018 through the effective date of its rates that result from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Job Act through a negative surcharge that includes interest at the residential mortgage lending rate specified by the Secretary of Banking. And secondly, that the Office of Special Assistance include this directive in its opinion and order to be prepared for this docket. Thank you.
You have heard the motion of Commissioner Sweet. We'll move to the polling on this issue. Commissioner Coleman.
I vote in favor of Commissioner Sweet's motion.
Commissioner Sweet, I would just assume you're going to be in favor
That
of
is a
the
correct
motion.
assumption,
Okay,
Madam
there you go.
I sometimes change my mind, but not.
Okay. Commissioner Kennard.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to be respectfully voting no on this item. By way of background, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act became effective on January 1st. It was upon us quickly. There was very little notice given. Our staff jumped on it quickly. By June 30th of this year, we were able to start flowback surcharges for those companies that didn't have pending rate cases. The stub period of January 1st through July 30th was set aside for those companies, and they were told that they would book it as a regulatory asset, and we reserved the right to charge interest. For those companies that did have rate cases, like UGI Electric, we told them to resolve it in this case. So the outcome of this is 2 months after all the non-rate case companies started returning the surcharge, UGI is as well, including for that stub period. I don't believe that UGI should be charged interest on this money, unlike the other companies who don't have any mechanism for flowing back that 6-month stub period, but rather have over a 5-year period to come to terms with that regulatory asset and need encouragement to come in and resolve it. UGI does not need that encouragement, and the stub period is much a function of Congress's quick action and our action to come to terms with it and determine a means to flow it back. So I'm going to be voting no.
But for purposes of the poll, which one are you supporting?
ALJ, that would be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Place.
Support Commissioner Sweet's motion.
And I also support Commissioner Sweet's motion.
Issue number 24, taxes, excess accumulated deferred income taxes.
Any discussion on this issue before we move into the poll? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I also will be supporting ALJ.
Issue number 25, taxes, Act 40 of 2016.
Is there any discussion before we move into the polling? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
OCA.
And I will be supporting ALJ.
Issue number 26, rate structure, allocated class cost of service study.
Any discussion before we move into the polling? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
OCA is indicated by my statement.
And I will be supporting ALJ.
Issue number 27, rate structure, revenue allocation.
Any discussion before we move into the polling? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
OCA is indicated by my statement.
And I will be supporting ALJ.
Issue number 28, rate structure, rate design.
Any discussion before we move into the polling? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I will be supporting ALJ.
Issue number 29, rate structure, scale back.
Any discussion before we move into the polling? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
Chairman, I'm going to vote with UGI on this matter. The cost of service study presented by the company indicated a customer charge cost of $19 per month. The company proposed a $14, substantially less than the indicated cost of service. It's been 22 years since this company had a rate increase, and one of the ramifications of that is the customer charge is not kept at pace with current regulatory thought process. For example, not to pick on PP&L, but on their most recent rate case, we approved, and they now are charging a $17.34 customer charge. Therefore, I believe we should approve a customer charge that is cost-based and not do a scale back. Therefore, I will be voting with UGI.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I will be supporting ALJ.
And last, finally, issue number 30, miscellaneous issues, quarterly earnings report.
Any discussion before we move into the polling? Hearing none. Commissioner Coleman.
ALJ.
Commissioner Sweet.
ALJ.
Commissioner Kennard.
ALJ.
Vice Chairman Place.
ALJ.
And I will also be supporting ALJ. Are there any further discussion on this polling?
So I have a statement and a motion.
Vice Chairman Place.
Thank you. All right. Madam Secretary, I ask that my statement be placed into the record as if I read it in its entirety. Before the Commission, as we all know, for consideration disposition is the UGI Utilities Incorporated Electric Division's request to increase its annual jurisdictional distribution operating revenues. I would like to express my thanks to the Administrative Law Judges Stephen K. Haas and Andrew M. Calvelli for their thorough review and insightful recommended decisions on the issues before us. Our determinations on the formal polling of issues before us today upholds the vast majority of these recommendations. I am also appreciative of the insights offered by all of the parties, including the Office of Consumer Advocate, the Office of Small Business Advocate, and the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement. Without each of these participants, our decision-making would have been severely handicapped. As to the formal polling of issues, I have departed from the majority on a few issues and wish to briefly articulate the reasons for these positions. As to polling issue 8, I concur with the ALJs and the I&E. The company's last rate case was, as noted, in 1996, 22 years ago. It seems abundantly reasonable, in fact, perhaps generous, to amortize the rate case expense over 5 years instead of 3 as proposed by UGI Electric. As to polling issue 13, again, I concur with the ALJ and I&E that the allotted stock options and restricted stock awards should not be recovered in future rates, as the evidentiary record clearly documented that the stock components are primarily based on financial metrics to determine actual payout. The main driver regarding recovery of incentive compensation revolves around enhancing the productivity and efficiency of the utility, including achievement of certain operational and consumer service goals, which have clear benefits to the consumers. While the company did provide evidence that these criteria were met for cash bonuses, the company did not carry its burden of proof regarding stock compensation programs. As to polling issues 18 and 22, I do not find the final approved ROE just and reasonable. I largely concur with the ALJ's methodology for the DCF calculation of growth rates. However, I believe that the underlying treatment of the data used does not produce a just and reasonable rate. Careful examination of the rates for First Energy and Duke Energy show that these are clear outliers in the data set. Value Line is projecting a growth rate of 12% relative to the two other rating agencies of 2% and 3.8% for First Energy companies. Similarly, Morningstar is predicting a growth rate of 9.1% relative to the other rating agencies of 3.23%, 4%, 4.05%, and 4.5% for Duke Energy. Clearly an outlier. If these demonstrative outliers are removed, the arithmetic mean of the 8 proxy utilities drops from 5.99% to 5.48%. If the 3.95 dividend growth rate is added to this average, an adjusted ROE of 9.43% results. As this example makes clear, the use of a small set of proxy companies produces average growth rates with unacceptably large variances and skewed means. For this reason, it is substantively more arithmetically sound to use data sets with greater number of proxy companies of similar nature across the country, as well as an empirical criteria to identify growth rate outliers. As to the management effectiveness adjustment, I believe that such adjustments may be appropriate both up or down, especially when other performance-based incentives are not already included in rates. As for UGI Electric, their performance metrics, as independently verified in the public reports here at the PUC, established near-top performance results relative to other Pennsylvania utilities. They have below benchmark statistics for all of their reliability metrics for the past 3 years, meaning performing well above expectations. Their low complaint levels are best in class, and customer service representatives are rated at near the top. In terms of area for improvement, I encourage the company to continue to improve on their call handling abandonment rates and calls not handled within 30 seconds. For this reason, I would, as a matter of principle, be willing to grant a management effectiveness adjustment reflecting the company's overall positive performance. However, the ALJ's ROE is already overstated by at least 20 basis points. As to polling issue 20, I find it more technically correct to use the geometric mean as used by I&E as opposed to the arithmetic mean used by the company in the calculation of the historic CAP-M. Lastly, as to polling issues 26 and 27, I support OECA's allocated class cost of service study. I believe that UGI Electric failed to adequately rebut OCA's argument that UGI system services 62,000 customers and under company witness Taylor's approach, each customer is allocated 32 feet of primary distribution conductor line. The company confirmed, however, that it extended its primary distribution facilities by an average of 1,350 feet to connect 3 of its largest customers to its distribution system, resulting in a misallocation of costs. The OCA further argues that the minimum system method is flawed in that it does not account for the proportions of each class's peak load that can be met by the minimum system itself. OCA witness Misera testified that failing to recognize the load carrying capability inherent in the hypothetical minimum system results in double allocation of primary and secondary upstream distribution costs to residential customers. I do not believe the company adequately addressed these issues in the record. I also believe the ALJ has relied too heavily on the NARUC manual reference in the isolated PPL rate case, when more than 30% of states do not practice such distribution system cost allocations to customer category. As to the motion,
Okay.
barrel my way through. Madam Secretary, I ask that my motion be placed in the record as if I read it in its entirety and I could use a glass of water. Before the commission for consideration, it was not meant to be literal, but it was. Thank you very much. I approve of Commissioner Sweet's motion to provide a glass of water. All right. Madam Secretary, I ask my motion be placed in the record, as I noted. Before the Commission for consideration and disposition is the UGI Utilities Incorporated Electric Division's request to increase its annual jurisdictional distribution operating revenues, as noted. As part of its filing, UGI Electric has opted to use a fully projected future test year to establish new rates for service. As a result of this change, I recommend that UGI Electric provide annual reports to the Commission for the next 5 years or until the implementation of new base rates and a subsequent rate case within this same time frame for the following items. 1. As to polling issue 4, UGI has proposed increased costs as a consequence of the Emerald Ash Borer. UGI Electric is to report its annual vegetation management expenses and the status of hiring an additional crew. 2. As to polling issue 5, UGI Electric has proposed to implement a new program to transition ownership of customer-owned service facilities to homeowners. UGI believes that $454,418 is necessary to fund the program. UGI Electric will send notices to affected customers, will conduct inspections, and if necessary, will repair or replace the customer-owned service equipment to ensure that it passes an inspection by an approved electrical inspector certified by the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry. This program will result in the inspection and transfer of This program will result in the inspection and transfer of responsibility for approximately 500 services a year for the next 10 years. UGI Electric is to report its actual annual customer-owned service-related expenses and the number of facilities transitioned to customer ownership. 3. As to polling issue 10, UGI Electric has projected the hiring of 3 new positions at an annual cost of $382,000. UGI Electric has to report its actual annual expenses associated with the hiring of these new employees, as well as any reductions in expenses if any positions are eliminated. Therefore, I move that 1, UGI Utilities Electric Incorporated Division is required to produce an annual report for the next 5 years as described herein consistent with this motion. 2, UGI Electric Utilities Incorporated is directed to file the annual reports of this docket with the Secretary's Bureau and with the Commission's fixed utility financial analyst supervisor of the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement by December 1, following the end of each fiscal year. And 3, the Commission's Office of Special Assistants prepare an opinion and order consistent with this motion. Thank you very much.
You've heard the motion of Vice Chairman Place. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Sweet. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Madam Chairman and Commissioners, that concludes all agenda matters presented before the Commission today.
Thank you very much. If there's no further business to come before us, this meeting is adjourned.